Only 5 people claimed they truly saw what happened that night, and for years, none of them agreed on how a man that size could fall so fast. Some said Bruce Lee never even touched him. Others swore they heard the impact before they understood what they were seeing. What everyone agreed on was the time. 10 seconds. That was the challenge, but it ended in 4, and the man who made that challenge was built like a wall of stone. This story was never printed in headlines. It was passed through gyms, locker rooms, private conversations, and whispered among fighters who knew what real danger looked like. Because on one humid night, in a room full of men who thought power always beat speed, they watched the rules collapse. And what happened next became legend. It was late evening in California, during the years when Bruce Lee was already becoming something larger than fame. He wasn't just an actor. He wasn't just a martial artist. By then, people spoke about him like an event, a force, a man who moved differently than other men. The training hall was hidden behind an ordinary storefront, nothing glamorous, no bright signs, no cameras. Just old wood floors scarred by years of impact, hanging bags darkened by sweat, and mirrors that had seen too many egos break apart. The room smelled of canvas, leather, and effort. Inside, a private group had gathered: students, fighters, curious men with folded arms, a few doubters, the kind of people who didn't clap easily and didn't impress easily either. Bruce was already there. He stood near the center of the room wearing simple training clothes, hands relaxed at his sides, shoulders loose, breathing slow. No stretching display, no intimidation, no speech. He looked almost casual. That was always the unsettling part. When Bruce Lee was calm, people felt more nervous. Then the challenger arrived. He had been talked about for weeks before he ever entered the room. A massive man from a hard contact background, known for crushing sparring partners with brute pressure. Broad chest, heavy hands, thick neck. The type of body that made doorways look smaller. When he stepped inside, conversation stopped. He stood several inches taller than Bruce and outweighed him by what some estimated to be nearly 80 pounds, maybe more. His forearms looked carved from timber. Every movement carried that slow confidence of someone used to never being physically denied. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. He just stared at Bruce Lee the way large men sometimes stare at smaller men when they think size has already won the argument. No one in the room spoke first. Then the giant finally did. He said Bruce was fast. He said Bruce was famous. He said Bruce was respected. Then he said none of that mattered once real pressure started. The room tightened instantly. He stepped closer and made the challenge in a voice everyone could hear. "Give me 10 seconds." Some remembered laughter after that, nervous laughter. Others remembered complete silence, but all of them remembered the meaning behind those words. 10 seconds to rush Bruce. 10 seconds to corner him. 10 seconds to expose him. 10 seconds to prove that technique folds under weight. The giant believed once his hands touched Bruce Lee, the myth would end. But Bruce didn't react. He didn't defend himself verbally. He didn't posture. He didn't pace. He simply looked at the man the way a surgeon might look at a difficult procedure. Calm, measuring, detached. Then Bruce asked one question. "Are you sure you need 10? Several men later said that sentence changed the temperature of the room. Because it wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was worse. It was certain. The challenger smirked, rolled his shoulders, and stepped back to clear space. His breathing deepened. Adrenaline was beginning to rise. You could hear it in the room now, that faint shift when spectators stop being observers and become witnesses. Someone moved a bench against the wall. Someone else shut the front door. Even the street noise outside seemed to disappear. Bruce walked to the center of the floor. Barely any stance, barely any visible preparation. Hands loose, weight balanced, eyes fixed, but soft. The giant bounced once on his feet, more to display power than to gain rhythm. The floor answered with a dull thud. He looked dangerous. Bruce looked uninterested. That contrast made people uneasy. Because everyone understood brute force, almost nobody understood control. The man raised his fists high and wide, shoulders flexed, jaw tight. He was preparing for collision. He wanted to storm forward, trap Bruce and bury him under momentum before speed could matter. Bruce noticed everything: the loaded hips, the heavy lead foot, the rising chest, the anger. Most people see size first. Bruce saw timing. A student near the mirror would later say he felt afraid for Bruce in that moment. Not because Bruce looked weak, but because the giant looked reckless enough to cause permanent damage. Another witness said Bruce seemed almost bored. No one expected what came next. A volunteer was asked to count. No bell, no gloves, no referee. Just a room full of men and 10 seconds that would be remembered for decades. The counter raised his hand. The giant leaned forward. Bruce blinked once. Ready? The room held its breath. Go. The giant exploded forward with shocking speed for a man that size. 2 stomping steps, shoulders driving like a battering ram, right hand loading from outside vision. He meant to crash through Bruce before Bruce could angle away. For an instant, it looked terrifying. For an instant, people thought the rush might work. For an instant, Bruce Lee seemed trapped. But the next 4 seconds became legendary. What happened next was so fast that witnesses spent years describing it differently. Because when speed crosses a certain threshold, memory breaks. Some said Bruce vanished off the center line. Some said he cut through the man's attack before it began. Some swore the giant punched only empty air. What all of them agreed on was that Bruce moved first without looking like he moved at all. The instant the challenger's lead foot slammed down, Bruce shifted half a step to the outside. Not wide, not dramatic, just enough to erase the line of attack. The charging fist ripped past his shoulder and struck nothing. The giant's eyes widened for the first time. He had committed everything to impact and found space instead. Before his missed punch could retract, Bruce's lead hand snapped forward like a striking snake, a straight shot down the center, no wasted motion. Knuckles landing clean between nose and mouth. The crack echoed sharper than anyone expected. The giant's head jerked back. But Bruce was already somewhere else. He pivoted with impossible economy, hips turning, rear foot whispering across the wood floor. Then came the second strike, short, brutal, perfectly timed into the exposed ribs, as the larger man twisted off balance. A deep thud rolled through the room. The challenger's breath vanished. He tried to inhale and couldn't. He staggered sideways, confusion replacing confidence. That alone would have stunned most rooms. But Bruce still wasn't finished. As the giant attempted to regain posture, Bruce stepped inside again. Too close for swinging power, too close for recovery. A final strike fired upward under the jaw, compact and precise, generated from inches instead of distance. The man's legs betrayed him instantly. His knees buckled, his arms, once raised like weapons, dropped like ropes, and then came the silence. Not cheering, not shouting, silence. Because no one had processed it yet. The counter still had his mouth open to say 4. The giant crashed to one knee, then both hands, staring at the floorboards as if the ground itself had turned against him. His breathing came in ragged bursts. Blood touched the wood beneath him in small dark drops. Bruce stepped back, hands relaxed, face unreadable. No celebration, no taunt, no demand for respect. He simply waited. That calmness unsettled people more than the strikes. Because rage after violence is common. Peace after violence is rare. The man on the floor tried to stand too quickly and nearly collapsed again. 2 spectators moved toward him, then hesitated, unsure whether helping him would embarrass him further. Bruce moved first. He offered a hand. The challenger stared at it for a long second, then took it. Witnesses later said the room changed in that moment. It stopped being about dominance. It became about truth. The giant rose slowly, chest-heaving, eyes watery from the centerline shot. He looked at Bruce not with anger now, but disbelief, as if he had just discovered strength he didn't know existed. He asked the question everyone wanted answered. "What was that?" Bruce's reply was quiet enough that only those nearest heard it clearly. Timing. Some remember him adding another word, efficiency. Others insist he said nothing more. Either way, the lesson landed harder than the punches. Because the room had just watched 80 pounds of advantage become irrelevant. The giant touched his jaw, then his ribs, then shook his head. His confidence hadn't merely been beaten. It had been reorganized. He had entered believing combat was collision. Bruce had shown him combat could be mathematics. Angles, rhythm, interception, control. Several men in the room began speaking at once, each trying to explain what they'd seen. but explanations collapsed into contradictions almost immediately. No, he hit first. No, he moved first. No, the body shot dropped him. No, the first punch already ended it. That confusion only deepened the legend. When people cannot agree on details, they agree on impact. And the impact was undeniable. One student later admitted he came that night hoping Bruce would be exposed. He thought movies had inflated the He thought real size would humble him. Instead, he said watching Bruce was like watching someone answer violence before violence had fully asked the question. Another witness claimed the most frightening part wasn't the speed. It was Bruce's eyes. No anger, no panic, no excitement, just complete awareness. The giant finally managed a strained laugh through swollen lips. It was the laugh of a man whose worldview had just cracked. He looked around the room, then said something no one expected. 10 seconds was generous, that broke the tension. The room erupted. Some laughed in relief. Some applauded. Some simply stared at Bruce Lee as if seeing him for the first time. Bruce gave only a small nod. Then he walked to the side of the room, picked up a towel, and began wiping his hands as casually as if nothing extraordinary had happened. That image stayed with witnesses for years. A massive challenger dropped in 4 seconds, and Bruce Lee drying his hands like he had just finished routine work. But what happened after that night is what turned a private incident into underground legend. No cameras had recorded it. No official report existed. No magazine published round-by-round details. So, the story traveled the old way, through gyms, through dressing rooms, through stunt sets, through fighters who trusted only stories told by other fighters. Every retelling added atmosphere but kept the same spine. A giant demanded 10 seconds. Bruce needed 4. Some versions made the challenger even bigger. Some versions placed money on the floor. Some versions said Bruce warned him first. Legends always mutate. But they mutate around something real. And something real had happened in that room. Because men who hated exaggeration kept repeating it. Years later, one witness was asked why nobody spoke publicly sooner. He answered with a sentence people never forgot. Because if you weren't there, you wouldn't believe us. That may have been the truest line of all. Bruce Lee's power was never just in punches. It was in what those punches revealed. That speed can erase fear. That precision can embarrass force. That calm can dominate rage. And that the most dangerous man in the room is often the one standing still. But there was one part of the story almost no one talked about. What Bruce Lee did in the seconds before the challenge began. Because the strikes were dramatic. The fall was unforgettable. The silence was legendary. Yet those who studied fighting later said the real victory happened before anyone moved. As the giant paced and flexed, Bruce was reading him, reading the tension in his shoulders, reading the impatience in his breathing, reading the way his front foot slammed too hard when he stepped, reading the pride that made him commit fully instead of carefully. Most men enter confrontation trying to impose themselves. Bruce entered trying to understand. That difference changes everything. The giant believed combat starts at contact. Bruce knew it starts much earlier, in posture, in rhythm, in ego, in the tiny habits a person reveals when they think they are the hunter. That is why Bruce looked so calm. He wasn't waiting, he was gathering information. And by the time the challenge started, he already knew where the attack would come from. This is the part casual spectators miss when they hear stories like this. They imagine magic speed, superhuman reflexes, impossible powers. But the deeper truth is often more impressive. Bruce trained himself to notice what others ignored. A raised shoulder telegraphs a punch, a planted heel delays recovery. A clenched jaw wastes oxygen. A charging mind narrows options. So when the giant lunged, Bruce was not reacting to surprise. He was confirming a prediction. That's why it looked supernatural. It was preparation disguised as instinct. Years after the incident, trainers who heard the story used it to teach younger fighters a brutal lesson. Size can intimidate before the fight, but mechanics decide what happens during it. The challenger had mass. Bruce had structure. The challenger had aggression. Bruce had timing. The challenger had confidence. Bruce had clarity. And clarity under pressure is rarer than strength. One former student remembered Bruce discussing fear after a training session. He said fear itself wasn't the enemy. Confusion was. When people panic, they freeze. When people understand, they move. That night, one man was powered by adrenaline, the other was powered by understanding. The result lasted 4 seconds, but the meaning lasted decades. There is another reason this story spread so widely among fighters. Humiliation stories usually fade. Respect stories survive. And by all accounts, Bruce never tried to shame the man afterward. He didn't boast, he didn't lecture the room, he didn't turn victory into theater. Instead, he spoke privately with the challenger near the wall, while others pretended not to stare. No one knows the full conversation. Accounts differ, but several men claimed the giant left smiling, despite the swelling on his face. That detail matters, because true masters often leave opponents injured in body but stronger in mind. The challenger came to disprove a legend. He left having met one. And that changed how others approached Bruce afterward. Some stopped seeing him as an entertainer who knew martial arts. They began seeing him as a martial artist who happened to be entertaining the world. That distinction was enormous. It meant the myth now had witnesses, and witnesses create momentum no publicity can buy. Soon, whenever new people visited the gym, someone would gesture to the floor and quietly say, right there, he dropped him. Right there, it happened in 4 seconds. Right there, a room full of skeptics went silent. The exact spot became part of the story. Old training halls are like that. Wood remembers impact, walls remember voices, floors remember truths men would rather forget. And if you listen carefully enough, some said you could still feel the tension of that night. Of course, critics dismissed the tale. They said memories exaggerate. They said fans worship heroes. They said private stories grow taller with time. Sometimes that's true. But legends do not survive solely because they are dramatic. They survive because they express something people recognize instantly. This story recognized a universal truth. Never mistake appearance for outcome. The larger man looked inevitable. Bruce looked vulnerable. Reality reversed both assumptions in 4 seconds. That reversal is why people still lean forward when they hear it. Because every person has faced some version of that giant. A problem too large. A rival too strong, a room stacked against them, a challenge designed to embarrass them, and every person hopes there exists some hidden advantage greater than size. Bruce Lee represented that hope, not fantasy, discipline, not magic, mastery, not luck, preparation meeting pressure. That is why the story refuses to die. And maybe the most revealing image came after everyone else left. According to one witness, Bruce stayed behind in the empty hall and resumed training. No speech. No celebration dinner. No replaying the victory. He went back to footwork drills. Forward, back, angle, step. Again and again across the scarred floor. As if 4 legendary seconds meant nothing compared to the next lesson. That image may be more powerful than the knockdown itself. Because greatness is not built in moments the crowd sees. It is built in the moments after the crowd goes home. People ask whether the story is true. They may be asking the wrong question. Maybe the better question is this. Does it reveal who Bruce Lee really was? A man who stayed calm while chaos rushed him. A man who valued precision over spectacle. A man who made impossible things look brief. A man whose shortest moments created the longest echoes. And somewhere in the memory of those old witnesses, the count still hangs in the air. 1, 2, 3, then impact, then silence. Then 4. That was all the time he needed. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more untold legends of Bruce Lee.